Tell Me Everything with John Fugelsang on SiriusXM Progress 127.
Happy 80th birthday, Mick Jagger. See, Chris, I said I wasn't going to play any Jagger tonight because of Sinead O'Connor, and you slipped him in anyway. This is SiriusXM Progress. Welcome to it. I'm John Fugelsang. You're listening to Channel 127, and we are at 866-997-GRIT, all the way until midnight on the East Coast, 9 p.m. on the Pacific. Now, yesterday, as you might know, a federal court blocked the Biden administration's temporary restrictions on migrants seeking legal asylum here in the U.S. What do these restrictions on migrants seeking asylum mean? Well, I'm so pleased to welcome back one of our favorite guests, Jina Krause-Vilmar, president and CEO of Upwardly Global and an expert on refugee and asylee issues. She put out a statement yesterday for Upwardly Global saying seeking asylum is a right enshrined in not just international law, but U.S. law as well. We are glad that a federal court recognizes this and struck down this harmful and dangerous policy. The focus of this administration should be refunding and equipping the asylum system to process newcomers entering the country. Families across America are raising their hands to take in asylum seekers, and our processing system should reflect that. It's a great pleasure to welcome the president and CEO of Upwardly Global, which is a great organization working to support immigrants and refugees with international credentials to restart their careers in the U.S., Jina Krause-Vilmar. Welcome back.
Hi, John. Nice to be back.
Hi. Nice to have you. The last time you were here, we were talking about how Afghan refugees were getting a new start here in the U.S., how a lot of Afghan women were getting a new start here, and all the positives and yet all the struggles still ahead of us. There's a lot here to unpack, and there's a lot of politics here to unpack, and there's something in this story to make everyone uncomfortable, isn't there?
I think that's a good summary. I think if we take a step back into memory lane, we will remember that, under the Trump administration, they had evoked Title 42, which allows them basically to deny people access into the United States, either seeking asylum or seeking another reason to come in because of health reasons.
Yes.
And so that was something that was enacted during COVID. And what ended up happening is that 1.9 million expulsions happened at the southern border during that time period. Now, the hope was under the Biden administration that would be overturned. And in effect, the Biden administration let it run its course and run out until 2 years into their tenure.
That's right.
And that also meant that, we had a report out from Human Rights First, which is a partner of ours, that said they had identified 13,500 cases of individuals sitting on the Mexican border waiting to legally enter into the United States through a port of entry and have experienced torture, kidnapping, rape, and other violent attacks. So it is not a comfortable place to be sitting on the Mexican border for an indefinite amount of time waiting to get your fair shot. And so eventually, the Title 42 expired, but what ended up happening is the administration then enacted a new policy which had the same effect as Title 42, which was how do you reduce the number of migrants crossing into the southwest border? And they did that by saying, okay, well, if you're trying to seek asylum here, you can only do it through an app, which we have set up called the CBP app, which, by the way, at this stage only allows for 200 slots a day. So you've got tens of thousands of people relying on a lottery-based system to be able to get into a queue in order to get a slot to meet with an asylum officer.
Right.
And I often think about, if I had to rely on Uber as an app in order to get 200 of those slots in order to get to safety, and competing with another 10,000 people, that would be a terrifying prospect.
We're talking about tens of thousands of people, tens of thousands of souls waiting in Mexico to apply for asylum legally. And I'm like, where do they get to charge their phones to check the app 10 times a day? And I just want to say, you mentioned Title 42. The world was watching with bated breath when Title 42 expired because our Republican friends were dancing in the streets saying there was going to be an invasion, their favorite word, of migrants across the border. And, of course, as you pointed out, the Biden White House found a way to put the kibosh on it. And it's interesting. It seems like the Trump administration did it because they're xenophobic racists, and the Biden administration pretty much did exactly what Trump did, because they're not xenophobic racists, but they don't want to get beaten up by xenophobic racists in an election year. It seems that the politics is guiding everything here, with all these souls lost in the balance, and these are legal asylum seekers. I'm so sorry to jump in, but we covered it a lot on this show, and they predicted there would be a huge influx, but instead we just reported that it's the lowest border crossings in 2 years. It's because of this Biden administration policy that's just been struck down.
Yeah, this is purely political. And they wanted to, get rid of the optics of people coming into the southern border. They wanted to decrease the number of people that were being relocated from Texas to California to New York. And so this was a political game that they're playing. I think it's now evident, because we had the court that struck this down, that basically said, actually, you can seek asylum no matter how you come into the United States. It is your right, not just under international law, it's your right under U.S. law. U.S. law that we established in the 1980s, a long time ago, that allows anybody who is at fear of persecution or experiencing persecution because of their social identity, whether it's ethnic, whether it's racial, whether it's political, to be able to seek safety in the United States. And so I think it's a positive that this was overturned. I think the fact that the Biden administration is appealed this is just a stalling tactic for them to get their ducks in a row, because they don't have an alternative plan at the moment. And what we are going to end up happening is we're going to start seeing that flow of individuals trying to come in legally. And so one of the things I take point with is when you read the press today, whether it's CBS or CNN, everybody's saying, well, the Biden administration, they had this policy in place and it really helped deter illegal migration. But the reality is these people are trying to come through a legal port of entry. They're not being smuggled in. They're trying to come through a legal port of entry. And they're trying to do it by getting on this app in order to get a slot. So that's not illegal migration. That is people trying to exercise their legal right to access asylum in the United States. And so I think that's one thing people need to realize. But I think the other thing is that, part of this policy mess is because only Congress can reform immigration policy. And so you have the Biden administration trying to solve for this. And this is a two-pronged approach. You've got the asylum ban on one hand, which is sort of the stick. And then you've got opening up legal pathways, which is the carrot. And I would say, actually, I'm very excited about what the Biden administration is trying to do in terms of trying to open up more legal pathways for people to seek economic opportunity in the United States, to be able to reunify with family. We talk a lot about the labor dynamics here. I mean, we've got, for every job opening, we've got less than one person that's unemployed. So for every unemployed person, we have 1.5 job openings. We do not have enough people. 83% of growth in our workforce today comes from immigrants and the children of immigrants. They make up 18% of our workforce already. And with 10,000 baby boomers retiring a day, and the fact that we're an aging population means that immigrants are going to be the future of our workforce. But frankly, we have huge pain points right now. We have pain points in farming, the agriculture industry. We have pain points in the trucking industry. We have pain points in software development. We have pain points across all skill levels. And the fact that we don't have immigration policy that is solving for this, and instead we're slamming the door in people's faces from their legal right to seek safety in the United States, in order for it to be good political optics, while behind the scenes we're trying to solve for it way in Latin America, so way out of the limelight, right? Which is, we've opened up safety mobility offices. This administration has opened up safety mobility offices in Guatemala and Costa Rica to start with. They've gotten many other countries to agree to open up these offices. And what they're saying is don't come to the southern border. Come here to Guatemala or Costa Rica or Ecuador, and we will process you. And they're making huge commitments. On average, it takes 4 years for someone's asylum claim to be processed. That's an insane amount of time. For a refugee, it takes on average
4 years.
2 years to be processed. And they're making a commitment to process people within 3 to 6 months. So not only are they saying, hey, come here and we'll process you, we're making a commitment to process 30,000 people a month, and we'll expedite that processing, which is huge in terms of reform of how we actually work the system. At the same time, they're saying, but don't come to the southern border, because if you do, you will be penalized. And so what this federal judge...
Because, I'm so sorry, but they'll be penalized because coming through the southern border makes us look bad, because that's what they beat us up for. That's the only reason, right? It's my understanding that international law requires America to allow any point of entry to be an appropriate place for asylees to enter. Is that correct? The international law says, no, it's not cheating. They can cross the border and claim asylum.
Yeah, they can also cross the border as a tourist. You know, we have asylum seekers who come in, they fly in from Saudi Arabia, or they fly in from other countries on a tourist visa, and then claim asylum when they're here, because that was their only way to get into the United States. You can seek asylum. That's the plot of Moscow on the Hudson with Robin Williams, literally. Yeah, a tourist did it. You're right. But you can seek asylum at any time, at anywhere within the United States. And so, yes, it's for political reasons. So they have this solution on the one side, but now they don't have that solution. They're not able to run it. They're still in the process of building it. So now they're looking for a tactic to stall this decision so that it gives them more running time to set this up. I think the real challenge is going to be migrants don't know that they should be going to a safety mobility office. They're going to come to the border, and they're still going to be looking to come into the United States. So in reality, we still have to solve for how are we processing people on the southern border. And I will say this. Americans are raising their hands. There are 3 million Americans who have raised their hands to say, we want to sponsor an asylum-seeking family. There are 250,000 of them who have already finished and completed the paperwork to do so. And so what we need to see is really an effort to say, okay, we've got asylum seekers coming in through the border. We're processing them, and they're getting passed because they have legitimate claims. Now, let's make sure we're matching them up with families that want to host these families so that we're actually setting people up for success. And I don't see that kind of effort of coordination and connecting the dots from this administration to really make sure we're leveraging the goodwill of the American public.
So let's talk about what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks, because tens of thousands of these folks have been waiting in Mexico and other countries in Central America for their number to get called, to find out what their status is going to be. And now, as you pointed out, they no longer have to apply via the safe mobility offices, and they're not going to get turned away or deported without being screened for their asylum claims, something our racists still can't understand. So I guess, how does this affect these screaming headlines on Fox News? Because I don't know if you know, inflation's down. Hunter Biden wants to plead guilty. They don't really have a lot right now. Should we start to expect hearing hysterical screeching about there's about to be another surge of migrants or asylum seekers at our southern border?
There's not going to be another surge. And the only reason there's not going to be another surge is for 2 reasons. One is because you still have to apply through the CBP1 app. So you're still playing lottery with people's lives by having them find a slot on that app each day. So that's going to control the number of people that are being seen. The second is because, the Biden administration has increased funding to double the number of asylum officers. But this is the hard part. Right. If you've got asylum officers in the safety mobility offices, and you've got 7 of those in Latin America, and they're staffing that, and then they're also supposed to be staffing on the southern border, and they're also supposed to be staffing for the 1.6 million asylum-seeking claim backlog, you don't have enough people. So even with the doubled investment in asylum officers, there's just too many asylum claims. And so what you're going to see is people who've already applied for asylum legally in the United States, their asylum claims are going to continue to go from 4 years on average to 5 or 6 years on average from being reviewed, which is really painful. You can't leave the country. We have a colleague at Upwardly Global who's an Afghan asylee, and her mother was evacuated to Canada, and she can't cross the Canadian border to see her mom. And she might not be able to for up to 5 years. And that's a terrifying prospect. So waiting for your asylum claim to be processed is not a fun business. So you've got limited asylum-seeking officers, and then you've got a trickle coming in because of the CBP-1 app. So anybody who says a surge is really just trying to paint a dramatic picture. Anybody who says it's going to increase illegal migration has really not understood that the reason why the number of migrants crossing to the U.S. border has trickled is because of the fact that these people are trying to get in through a legal port of entry.
So these people now, it's going to go back to the way it used to be. They can't be turned away or deported without being screened for their claims of asylum. So the main difference is they're not going to be on the other side of the Mexican border sitting around in refugee camps waiting for an app to work. They're going to get to come here and stay here while their cases go through all the courts. What's that going to mean for the overcrowding at the southern border? We've been spending a lot of time focusing on the human rights atrocities of Greg Abbott in the last 2 weeks.
It will remain. So, we're going to see maybe 300 to 500 people processed a day. You've got tens of thousands of people on the Mexican border. That's going to take some time for that to be processed. And in the meantime, you're going to see more and more people come. And so that's just going to replace the folks that are coming through. So we're not going to see, unfortunately, those atrocities change, which is the sad part. What we are going to see, though, is when people do come in, we're going to have the same situation of people needing to find somewhere to sleep, and nonprofits and community-based organizations bearing the brunt of that opportunity. But the good news is they have the infrastructure. They know how to do this. They've already done this earlier this year. And then the hope is we don't see these continued political games from the state of Texas or the state of Florida where they're shipping people off to blue states.
So here's my other question then. What does this mean for all the folks who are trying to apply for asylum from Syria, from Afghanistan, as we talked about the last time, from Ukraine? I mean, will this result in longer wait times for these other poor suffering folks and their families trying to gain asylum?
I think we're really worried about that. I think we're worried about the equity issue around who gets to seek asylum in the United States because of processing. I think that's the same for refugees, because we're actually increasing the number of refugees we're processing from Latin America, which is a good thing. But that also means that those numbers then are taken away from other regions in the world. We haven't seen the same kind of emphasis on helping support Sudanese in the same way we support Ukrainians, or we're supporting those coming from Latin America, which I think is also worrying. And so I do think it's going to impact numbers. I think the administration knows that a lot of immigrant advocates are advocating hard that it not be the case. They're aware of that, but I just don't see how the numbers work.
I know. The Republican Party will use this to beat up on the Democrats any way they can. It's going to be all manner of racism. It's going to be all manner of calling these Christian refugees, which is what they are. It's going to be calling them illegals. And we know that no matter what Biden does, people who don't care about the border and don't care about these refugees will exploit them and use them to hurt people with empathy and to hurt this administration. You get it. The people who think Donald Trump's a good person will love this because it will allow them to be incredibly shitty. But is it true that polling data shows a majority of Americans are right now supporting access to asylum at the southern border?
Yeah, well, 60% of Americans are supporting, which is pretty significant. I mean, I think generally it's a bipartisan issue in terms of people seeking safety. I think the challenge is we have to remind people that these people are seeking safety. Nobody picks up and gives up their entire lifestyle, their entire living, their home without a really good reason. And so I think that's what we have to remind people. I think we also have to demyth the fact that, 63% of asylum cases are approved, affirmative asylum cases, because the majority of people who are coming in to seek asylum are legitimately coming in to seek asylum. So I think there are a bunch of narratives we're going to have to counteract. But I would have to say, I go back to those 3 million people in the United States who've raised their hands to open up their homes. So I think that's incredibly impressive. I think now it's just a question of how are we connecting these dots.
Well, can I ask you to connect a couple more dots for me? Because this might not be your area of expertise, but I'm dying for your opinion of it. We keep hearing about these Central America asylum seekers from Honduras and El Salvador. And I've been to both those countries. I first went to those countries as a comedian to do stand-up for the U.S. troops that are stationed there, because we have military bases in Honduras and El Salvador right now. And when I got there, I figured out why, because our drug war is still very much in progress in El Salvador and Honduras. In El Salvador, the troops I performed for weren't allowed to be in uniform when they left their base. So these people are fleeing, in many cases, the violence that is wrought by our own drug prohibition. Maybe I'm deeply naive. Well, I know I'm deeply naive, but it seems like this is one of the strongest areas we've ever seen to argue for decriminalization, legalization, and regulation of drugs. Take the profit motive out for the gangs. If you don't like seeing these people fleeing violence from our drug war, can't we talk about just stopping our drug war?
You know, it's so interesting that you say that, because I think there is more of a push now to say, okay, if we don't want this number of asylum seekers in the United States, how do we start addressing some of the issues in these countries? And the drug war is not on that conversation docket at all. So I think it's a really interesting point.
Yeah, that's just me. I think about these things too much. So I guess the million-dollar question is, if you were advising the Biden administration on how to handle this situation with humanity and yet still not get your butt kicked in an election by these xenophobic racists, what advice would you give this White House?
I think, so I'd say first, you've got to get these people housing. So you've got to get them to places where they can actually access housing, because we can't have the image of these individuals living on the streets and being homeless, which creates a perception that they're dependent on the welfare state. I think the second is we've got to decrease the amount of time it takes for somebody to get processed. And really, and just to sort of say, like, you know, you're allowed to be asylum seeker, and now we're processing your claim, but it takes 5 months before you can apply for a work permit. So the way it works is you first come in, you apply to seek asylum, you get an interview. That person says, okay, you have a legitimate claim. Then you complete the paperwork, preferably with legal counsel, because it significantly increases your odds of actually applying correctly. And then you wait. And they say, okay, you're an asylum seeker. You're an asylee. You're waiting to become an asylum seeker. So let's, in 5 months, you can apply for a work permit. That's too long. I don't know how anybody lives for 6 months without working. So I think I'd recommend that they decrease that amount of time so people can start working. And then I think, you know, they start making real linkages with employers that are desperate for talent. And I just want to say, we're talking about all skill levels. Okay. So people coming from Venezuela have multiple skill levels. We've helped place 200 asylum seekers last year, earning $67,000 a year. The biggest industries they're working in are business logistics and operations, technology, and healthcare. So they are legitimately a group of people that could be helping support our economy in multiple ways. And I think the answer is we need the help. So the economy can sustain it. And if we can demonstrate that they're supporting the economy as well as thriving, then I think it takes away some of the political back and forth with the Republicans, because nobody's stealing anybody's job at this point.
So what's the best way for our listeners to keep up with you and all of the work that Upwardly Global is doing right now?
So you should go to upwardlyglobal.com and connect with us on either Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or however you want to get your news.
Jina Krause-Vilmar, it's always an honor. Anytime we can get you on the show, please come back more often. This situation is not going to go away, and I'm so grateful for your clarity and compassion on this issue. You really have a very artful way of calling out this administration because you want to help them in the long term, and it's very rare to see. Thank you for everything you do.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll hope to see you very soon.